The Montana sunrise painted the sky in shades of amber and rose as Sarah Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, her weathered hands submerged in a bowl of flour and butter. At 68 years old, her fingers moved with the practiced ease of someone who had made thousands of pies over the decades. The dough came together perfectly. She had that gift, the neighbors always said. Sarah Mitchell could make the best apple pie in 3 counties, maybe in the whole state. But what the neighbors didn't know, what the people at the church bake sales and community gatherings never suspected, was that these same hands had once gripped the controls of military aircraft during some of the most dangerous operations of the Cold War. Sarah's small ranch house sat on 20 acres of rugged Montana terrain, surrounded by pine trees and mountains that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. It was peaceful here, exactly the kind of peace she'd been searching for when she and her husband Tom had bought the property 40 years ago. Tom was gone now, 5 years in the ground, and the silence sometimes felt overwhelming. But today was different. Today she was flying to Seattle to see her granddaughter Emma, who had just turned 16. The thought brought a smile to Sarah's lined face as she wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the coffee maker. Emma was special, curious, brave, always asking questions about life and the world. She reminded Sarah of herself at that age, though Emma lived in a world Sarah could barely have imagined back then. A world where women could be anything they wanted, do anything they dreamed. Emma wanted to be an astronaut. Sarah had told her to reach for the stars, literally. If only Emma knew how high her grandmother had once flown. Sarah poured her coffee into a thermos and walked to her bedroom, where her flight bag sat packed and ready. She'd learned long ago to prepare everything the night before. Old habits died hard, military habits even harder. Inside the bag, charts, her pilot's license, a handheld radio, snacks, water, and a small leather journal she'd kept for decades. She never wrote in it anymore, but she couldn't bear to leave it behind. Moving to her closet, Sarah pulled out a comfortable pair of jeans and a flannel shirt. As she dressed, her eyes caught on something pushed far back on the top shelf, hidden behind old sweaters. A wooden box, small and unassuming, covered in a thin layer of dust. She hadn't opened it in years. Decades, maybe. Her hand reached up almost involuntarily, fingers brushing the edge of the box. Inside were medals, commendations, photographs. A whole life she'd carefully packed away and never discussed. Captain Sarah Caldwell. That was the name on those documents. The woman who'd fought tooth and nail to fly military aircraft when women weren't supposed to dream that big. The woman who'd flown reconnaissance missions that she still couldn't fully discuss, bound by oaths that outlasted her service. Sarah pulled her hand back. Not today. Today she was just a grandmother going to visit family. Outside, the morning air was crisp and clean as she loaded her truck with packages wrapped in bright paper. Birthday gifts for Emma, homemade jam for her daughter Bate, and of course, 2 freshly baked apple pies secured in travel containers. She drove the familiar dirt road to the small private airstrip 3 miles from her house, where her Cessna 172 waited in its hangar. The hangar door rolled open with a metallic screech. There she was, November 723 Tango Charlie, her beloved Cessna. The plane was old, manufactured in 1978, but Sarah maintained it meticulously. Every rivet, every cable, every instrument was checked and rechecked. Some people thought she was paranoid. Sarah called it professionalism. As she began her pre-flight inspection, something shifted in her demeanor. The grandmother persona fell away like a comfortable coat removed for work. Her movements became precise, efficient, methodical. She checked the fuel tanks, running her hands along the wings to feel for any irregularities. She examined the propeller for nicks or damage. She tested the control surfaces, ailerons, elevator, rudder, ensuring each moved freely and correctly. She checked the oil level, the tire pressure, the security of the cowling. An observer would have noticed something unusual about the way this elderly woman moved around the aircraft. There was nothing hesitant or uncertain in her actions. This wasn't a hobby pilot going through memorized steps. This was muscle memory built over thousands of flight hours, training that had been drilled into her until it became as natural as breathing. Sarah climbed into the cockpit and began the interior check. Master switch on, fuel gauges reading full, controls free and correct, instruments alive and functional. She paused at the transponder, the device that broadcast her aircraft's identification to air traffic control. The display flickered slightly, and she frowned. It had been acting up lately. She made a mental note to have it looked at when she returned. For now, it seemed to be working well enough for a simple cross-country flight. She programmed her GPS with the route to Seattle, though the small handheld unit was old and sometimes temperamental. Sarah preferred to navigate the old-fashioned way anyway, pilotage and dead reckoning, reading the landscape below and trusting her instruments. Technology was fine, but it could fail. Skills never did. The engine coughed to life with a familiar rumble that made Sarah smile. She radioed her departure to the local traffic frequency, received no response, typical for this remote area, and taxied to the runway. The morning sun glinted off the windscreen as she advanced the throttle. The Cessna accelerated down the strip, and at 65 knots, Sarah eased back on the yoke. The wheels left the earth, and for a moment everything else fell away. Up here, Sarah wasn't a widow or a grandmother or a woman hiding her past. Up here, she was just a pilot, doing what she'd been born to do. She climbed to her cruising altitude of 8,500 feet, settled into her heading, and trimmed the aircraft for level flight. The world spread out below her in magnificent detail: mountains, forests, rivers winding through valleys like silver ribbons. It was going to be a beautiful flight. Sarah had no way of knowing that in less than an hour, her peaceful journey would become a national security incident. She didn't know that her simple navigation error would summon two of the most advanced fighter jets ever built. She couldn't imagine that the secret she'd kept buried for 45 years was about to explode into the open. But as she flew westward into the brightening sky, humming an old tune from her youth, fate was already setting its trap. The past, no matter how carefully hidden, always has a way of catching up. And for Sarah Mitchell, that reckoning was now just minutes away. At 8,500 feet, the world looked different. Sarah Mitchell gazed out at the endless expanse of mountains and forests below, feeling the familiar sense of freedom that only flying could provide. The Cessna's engine hummed steadily, a comforting rhythm that had accompanied her on hundreds of flights over the years. The morning sun warmed the cockpit, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. She glanced at her handheld GPS unit mounted on the dashboard. The small screen flickered, then stabilized, showing her position and course. Seattle was roughly 3 hours away, following a northwestern route that would take her over some of Montana's most beautiful terrain before crossing into Idaho and eventually Washington state. It was a route she'd flown a dozen times before, though never in recent years. Life had kept her grounded more than she liked. Sarah's mind drifted to Tom, as it often did when she flew. He'd been the one who taught her to fly recreationally years after she'd left the military. "You miss it," he'd said one evening, watching her stare at planes flying overhead. "So let's get you back up there." Within a month, he'd surprised her with lessons at the local flight school. Within 6 months, she had her private pilot's license. Within a year, they'd bought the Cessna together. Those had been good years. Flying together on weekends, taking trips to visit friends and family, exploring the vast American West from the air. Tom in the right seat, her at the controls, both of them free as birds. He'd never asked about her military service. He knew it was something she didn't discuss. He'd simply loved her for who she was in the present, not who she'd been in the past. The GPS screen flickered again, more insistently this time. Sarah tapped it with her finger and it seemed to reset. But when it came back on, the position reading looked slightly off. She frowned, checking her heading indicator and compass. They seemed aligned, but something felt wrong. The GPS now showed her about 2 miles south of where she thought she should be. "Damn technology," she muttered, adjusting her course slightly northward to compensate. What Sarah didn't realize was that her GPS had been slowly failing for the past 20 minutes. Its internal compass was giving false readings, and her correction had actually pushed her further off course, not back on track. The landscape below was beginning to change in subtle ways, but absorbed in her memories and trusting her instruments, she didn't notice. The terrain was becoming more angular, more geometric. What should have been pristine wilderness now showed signs of unusual development. Long straight roads leading to nowhere visible, cleared areas in perfect rectangles, strange rectangular buildings that didn't match any civilian architecture. But Sarah, flying at 8,500 feet and lost in thought, saw only the general pattern of mountains and valleys. She reached for her thermos of coffee, taking a sip and savoring the warmth. The radio crackled with distant communications from other aircraft, but none close to her position. She was alone up here just the way she liked it, alone with her thoughts, alone with the sky. The transponder on her panel continued its slow malfunction. Unknown to Sarah, it had stopped broadcasting her identification code 15 minutes ago. On radar screens, she was now just an unidentified blip, an aircraft without a name, without authorization, without explanation. Sarah adjusted her heading again, trying to reconcile what her GPS was telling her with what her gut instincts suggested. 45 years ago, she would have trusted her instincts over any instrument. But age and civilian life had made her defer to technology. The GPS said go left, so she went left. It was the wrong decision. Below, buried deep in a mountain complex, sensors detected her presence. The aircraft had entered a 10-mile restricted zone surrounding one of America's most sensitive military installations, a nuclear missile control facility that coordinated a significant portion of the nation's strategic deterrent. The airspace above it was forbidden territory, protected by the full might of the United States Air Force. In the control room, Senior Airman Rodriguez stared at his radar screen with growing concern. An unidentified aircraft, no transponder code, no flight plan on file, no radio contact, penetrating restricted airspace at a steady rate. He followed protocol, trying to raise the aircraft on emergency frequencies. Unidentified aircraft in vicinity of restricted area R4202. You are entering prohibited airspace. Identify yourself immediately and turn to heading 90. Sarah heard nothing. Her radio was tuned to the local traffic frequency, not the emergency channel Rodriguez was broadcasting on. Rodriguez tried again. Nothing. The blip continued its steady progress, now 5 miles inside the restricted zone and closing on the most sensitive area. His training kicked in hope for the best, prepare for the worst. He reached for the red phone that connected directly to Malmstrom Air Force Base. This is Sierra 7 at Mountain Site. We have a potential breach of restricted airspace. Single aircraft, no transponder, no response to radio contact. Currently 5 miles inside R4202 and approaching primary facility. Recommend immediate intercept. On the other end of the line, the duty officer's blood ran cold. Post 9/11 protocols were clear and unforgiving. Any unidentified aircraft approaching a nuclear facility was treated as a potential terrorist threat until proven otherwise. There was no room for chances, no time for questions. Copy Sierra 7, stand by for confirmation. The duty officer turned to his commander, a hard-faced lieutenant colonel with 30 years of service. Sir, we have an unidentified aircraft in restricted airspace over Mountain Site. No transponder, no comms, 5 miles in closing. The lieutenant colonel didn't hesitate. He'd made this decision in training exercises dozens of times, but never for real, until now. Scramble the alert fighters. Rules of engagement Alpha 3. If that aircraft doesn't comply with instructions, we treat it as hostile. The klaxon sounded throughout Malmstrom Air Force Base. In the alert hangar, 2 F-22 Raptor pilots who'd been sitting in their flight suits, reading and waiting, jumped to their feet. This was what they trained for. This was what they feared they might one day have to do. Scramble, scramble, unidentified aircraft restricted airspace. This is not a drill. Major David Chen and Captain Jessica Torres sprinted toward their aircraft, adrenaline flooding their systems. Within 90 seconds, they would be airborne. Within 5 minutes, they would have visual contact with the target. Above it all, Sarah Mitchell flew peacefully onward, humming a tune from the 1970s, completely unaware that she was now considered a potential threat to national security. Her GPS continued to fail, leading her deeper into forbidden territory. Her transponder remained silent, offering no identification, no explanation, no mercy. The sky ahead looked clear and beautiful, but death was racing toward her at supersonic speed. And she had no idea. Major David Chen's boots hammered against the concrete as he sprinted across the tarmac toward his F-22 Raptor. The klaxon's wail pierced the morning air, a sound that every fighter pilot both dreads and anticipates their entire career. Behind him, Captain Jessica Torres matched his pace stride for stride, her face set in grim determination. "What do we know?" Torres shouted over the alarm. "Unidentified aircraft, restricted airspace over mountain sight," Chen yelled back. "No transponder, no response to radio contact." Torres felt her stomach tighten. Mountain sight. That meant nuclear assets. That meant the threat level was critical. That meant if this went wrong, it could go very, very wrong. They reached their aircraft, where ground crews were already pulling away the ladders and preparing for immediate launch. Chen's F-22, tail number 34, gleamed in the morning sun, a sleek, angular predator worth over $150 million and capable of speeds exceeding 1,500 miles per hour. Torres' aircraft, 41, sat ready beside it. Chen climbed the ladder with practiced speed, his crew chief right behind him helping with straps and connections. "Sir, you're hot and ready. Weapons armed per Alpha 3 protocols." Chen's hands moved through the startup sequence he'd performed thousands of times, but never quite like this. Alpha 3 protocols meant rules of engagement that authorized deadly force if the target didn't comply. His fingers trembled slightly as he brought the powerful Pratt and Whitney engines to life. The F-22 thrummed beneath him like a caged animal eager to hunt. "Raptor 1 ready for taxi," he radioed. "Raptor 2 ready," Torres confirmed, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Raptor flight, you're cleared for immediate takeoff, runway 26. Contact departure on button 3. Target bearing 295, range 47 miles, Angels 8.5, speed 120 knots. Designated as Track India 1. Approach with extreme caution." "Raptor 1 copy." Both fighters rolled toward the runway, and seconds later, Chen pushed his throttles forward. The F-22 leaped into the sky with the raw power of 70,000 pounds of thrust. Torres followed 3 seconds behind, her aircraft clawing into the Montana sky with brutal efficiency. As they climbed through 10,000 feet, Chen pulled up the target information on his display. A single blip moving slowly, steadily toward one of the most sensitive military installations in North America. The profile was all wrong for a commercial airliner. Too slow, too low, too small. It looked like a light civilian aircraft, maybe a Cessna or Piper. "Control, Raptor 1. Confirm target profile. This looks like a light civilian." "Raptor 1, affirmative. Single-engine aircraft, estimated Cessna 172 or similar. No transponder code. No response on any frequency. Treat as potentially hostile until identified." Chen exchanged glances with Torres' aircraft, now flying in tight formation beside him. A Cessna, a small plane, but that didn't mean anything. After September 11th, everyone in the Air Force knew that the size of the aircraft didn't determine the threat level. Small planes could carry explosives, biological weapons, or suicidal terrorists just as easily as large ones. "Raptor 2, you thinking what I'm thinking?" Chen radioed on their discreet frequency. "Lost pilot, navigation error," Torres replied, hope evident in her voice. "Maybe, or maybe something worse. Stay sharp, Jess." "Copy that." They accelerated to 600 knots, closing the distance rapidly. Chen's radar locked onto the target, tracking it precisely. His weapons systems were armed, AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles and a 20mm cannon loaded and ready. He prayed he wouldn't need them. 20 miles out, Chen began to slow, pulling his throttles back to avoid overshooting the target. Torres matched his speed perfectly, the two F-22s moving as one unit. Raptor flight, maintain intercept course. Visual identification required. Be advised, target has now penetrated inner restricted zone. Authorization granted for warning shots if target fails to comply with instructions. Raptor 1 copy. Warning shots authorized. Chen's mouth went dry. Warning shots meant firing his cannon near the aircraft to get the pilot's attention. It was a last resort before actually shooting the plane down. He'd never done it outside of training. He'd never wanted to. 10 miles. The target was clearly visible on his radar now, maintaining steady course and altitude. No evasive maneuvers, no sudden changes. Either the pilot was incredibly brazen or completely unaware of the situation. 5 miles. Chen began his final approach, dropping his speed to 250 knots to avoid overshooting the slow-moving Cessna. Raptor 2, take high cover. I'm moving in for visual. Copy, moving high. Torres pulled her F-22 into a climb, positioning herself 1,000 feet above and behind Chen's aircraft. From there, she could observe the intercept and provide backup if needed. Chen eased his fighter alongside the Cessna, approaching from the rear quarter to avoid startling the pilot. As he closed to within 100 feet, he could finally see details of the aircraft. White with blue trim, civilian registration number on the tail, single propeller spinning steadily. And in the cockpit. Control, Raptor 1 has visual on target. Single occupant, appears to be an elderly female, gray hair, civilian clothing. Aircraft is November 723 Tango Charlie, registered Cessna 172. There was a pause on the radio. Raptor 1 confirm elderly female. Affirmative, appears to be 60s or 70s, solo pilot. Chen maneuvered his F-22 directly alongside the Cessna's left side, close enough to see clearly into the cockpit. The woman was looking straight ahead, seemingly unaware of his presence. She appeared to be humming or singing, her hands steady on the controls. Then she glanced left, and her face transformed into an expression of absolute terror. Her mouth opened in what must have been a scream, though Chen couldn't hear it. Her whole body jerked in surprise, and the Cessna wobbled dangerously as her hands spasmed on the controls. "Easy, easy," Chen muttered, though she couldn't hear him. He pulled back slightly to give her room to recover. The woman's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She looked from Chen to her radio panel, fumbling with the controls. Chen pointed to his radio, then held up 5 fingers. Emergency frequency 121.5. Unidentified Cessna, this is United States Air Force Fighter 34. You have violated restricted airspace. Switch to frequency 121.5 immediately and follow my instructions. He watched as the woman's trembling hands adjusted her radio. A moment later, her voice came through his headset, shaky, terrified, elderly. "This is, oh God, this is November 723 Tango Charlie. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean. I'm just going to see my granddaughter. Please, I don't understand what's happening." Tor's voice came over the discreet frequency. "David, she sounds genuinely confused. Lost pilot." Chen studied the woman carefully. She was crying now, tears streaming down her weathered face. Her hands shook on the controls. This didn't look like a terrorist. This looked like someone's grandmother who'd made a terrible mistake. But Chen had his orders. November 723 Tango Charlie, you are in violation of restricted airspace surrounding a military installation. Turn immediately to heading 270 and follow me. Do not deviate from my flight path. Any failure to comply will result in immediate action. Do you understand? Yes, yes, I understand, the woman sobbed. I'm so sorry, I'll follow you. Please don't shoot me. Chen's heart ached, but he maintained his professional demeanor. Turn now to heading 270. He watched as the Cessna slowly, carefully turned to the new heading. Tours dropped back down to join the formation, taking position on the Cessna's right side. The small civilian aircraft now flew between two of the most advanced fighter jets in the world, like a sparrow caught between hawks. Control, Raptor 1. Target is complying. 2-ship escort in progress. Estimate 20 minutes to secure landing site. Raptor 1, excellent work. Be advised, security teams are in position. FBI and military intelligence are standing by for interrogation. Chen looked once more at the terrified woman in the Cessna. Grandmother or not, she'd violated some of the most restricted airspace in America. Whatever her story was, she was about to have a very difficult day. He just hoped for her sake that it was all an innocent mistake. But in his experience, nothing was ever that simple. The SUV stopped in front of a plain concrete building with no windows and no markings. Sarah was escorted out by two stone-faced Air Force security personnel, their hands firmly but not painfully gripping her arms. Her legs felt weak, threatening to give out with each step. The building's heavy steel door opened with an ominous clank, and she was led inside into harsh fluorescent lighting that made her squint. The interior was exactly what she'd expected and feared: cold, sterile, institutional. Gray walls, gray floors, the smell of industrial cleaner and coffee. They walked her down a corridor lined with closed doors, each marked only with numbers. Finally, they stopped at door number 7. Inside was a small room containing only a metal table bolted to the floor and 4 chairs. A mirror covered one wall, obviously one-way glass. A camera mounted in the corner blinked with a red recording light. Sarah's escorts guided her to one of the chairs on the far side of the table, and she sat, her whole body trembling. "Someone will be with you shortly," one of the guards said, his voice neutral. Then both men left, and she heard the distinctive click of a lock engaging. Sarah was alone. She put her face in her hands and tried to control her breathing. "Think, Sarah, think. This is a misunderstanding. Just explain what happened. They'll understand. They have to understand." But even as she tried to reassure herself, doubt crept in. She'd violated restricted airspace around what was clearly a highly sensitive facility. In today's world, with terrorism always a concern, they wouldn't take chances. They couldn't take chances. Minutes passed like hours. Sarah's mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. Federal charges, prison time, her name in the newspapers. Emma finding out her grandmother was arrested as a potential terrorist. The shame, the humiliation. The door opened suddenly, making Sarah jump. 2 men entered, both in Air Force uniforms, both with the hard eyes of people who'd seen too much to be easily fooled. The first was a major, his name tag reading MORRISON. The second was a captain named HUGHES. They carried tablets and folders, settling into the chairs across from her with practiced efficiency. Morrison studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I'm Major William Morrison, Air Force Office of Special Investigations. This is Captain Richard Hughes. Do you understand why you're here?" Sarah's voice came out as a croak. I violated restricted airspace, but it was an accident. My GPS malfunctioned and I—" "Let's start with the basics," Morrison interrupted, his tone professional but cold. "Full name, address, and purpose of your flight today." "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. I live at 4847 Copper Creek Road, Livingston, Montana. I was flying to Seattle to visit my granddaughter for her birthday." Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. Please, I need to call my daughter. She's expecting me and she'll be worried. You'll be able to make a phone call once we've established some facts, Hughes said, tapping on his tablet. Your aircraft registration shows you as the sole owner of November 723 Tango Charlie, a 1978 Cessna 172. How long have you owned this aircraft? 42 years. My husband and I bought it together in 1983. And you fly regularly? A few times a month, less in winter, just local flights mostly, visits to family. Sarah leaned forward desperately. Gentlemen, I know what this looks like, but I promise you, I'm just a retired rancher. I made a mistake. My GPS was giving me bad readings, and I didn't realize I'd drifted off course until your jets appeared. I would never intentionally. Morrison held up a hand, silencing her. Mrs. Mitchell, you penetrated restricted airspace surrounding one of our most sensitive military installations. You showed no transponder code. You didn't respond to multiple radio calls. And your story is that it was all just a series of unfortunate accidents. Yes, my transponder has been acting up. I was going to get it fixed when I got back. And I was on the local traffic frequency, not the emergency channel. I didn't hear any calls until your pilot contacted me directly. Hughes and Morrison exchanged glances. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. You have to admit, Mrs. Mitchell, that's quite convenient. Every security system just happened to fail at exactly the right time to get you into forbidden airspace. I'm not lying. Sarah's voice rose with desperation. Check my flight history, check my records. I've never had any violations, any incidents, anything. I'm a careful pilot. This was a horrible accident, nothing more. We're checking everything, Hughes said, his fingers moving across his tablet. But you need to understand the gravity of the situation. You violated federal law, Title 49, CFR 91.141. The penalties are severe, up to 1 year in federal prison and fines up to $100,000, and that's assuming there was no malicious intent. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Prison, but I didn't do anything wrong. I made a navigation error. An error that brought you within 3 miles of a nuclear weapons facility, Morrison said sharply. An error that required us to scramble 2 F-22 fighters. An error that could have resulted in your aircraft being shot down. Do you have any idea what could have happened? Tears began streaming down Sarah's face again. I know, and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but I'm not a terrorist, I'm not a threat, I'm just, her voice broke. I'm just a grandmother who wanted to see her granddaughter. Morrison's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. Then help us understand. Walk us through your entire morning, every detail. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah recounted everything. Waking up, baking pies, loading her plane, her pre-flight inspection, the takeoff, her flight route. She showed them pictures on her phone of Emma, of her daughter Bate, of her late husband Tom. She told them about her ranch, her neighbors, her life in Livingston. Hughes typed notes continuously on his tablet. Morrison watched her face, searching for any sign of deception. You said you've been flying for 42 years, Morrison said finally. But your private pilot license shows you got it in 1983. Did you fly before that? Sarah hesitated just for a fraction of a second. Yes, I learned to fly long before that, in my 20s. Why the gap? Why wait so long to get your private license? Sarah's mind raced. This was dangerous territory. I just didn't fly for a while. Life got busy. Morrison leaned forward, sensing something. Mrs. Mitchell, is there anything in your background you're not telling us? Any military service? Any government work? Sarah's heart pounded. This was the moment. She could keep hiding, keep pretending to be just a simple rancher, or she could tell them the truth, a truth she'd buried for 45 years. But before she could answer, Hughes's tablet chimed. He glanced at it and his eyebrows shot up. "Major," he said quietly, turning the screen toward Morrison. "The background check just came back. You need to see this." Morrison looked at the screen and his expression changed entirely. His eyes widened, then narrowed as he read. He looked up at Sarah with something between shock and confusion. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said slowly, "according to this, you're not in any civilian database before 1980. It's like you didn't exist. But there's a flag here, a military flag. It's restricted, but—" He paused, reading more carefully. "It says to contact the Pentagon, Office of Personnel Records, Cold War-era classification section." Sarah closed her eyes. After all these years, after all her careful silence, the truth was about to emerge. "Mrs. Mitchell," Morrison's voice had changed, uncertainty creeping in. "Who are you really?" Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly at him. When she spoke, her voice was steady for the first time since the F-22s had appeared. "My name is Sarah Mitchell now," she said quietly. "But it used to be Captain Sarah Caldwell, United States Air Force, and I think we need to make a different kind of phone call." The room went absolutely silent. The silence in the interrogation room was deafening. Major Morrison stared at Sarah with an expression that cycled through disbelief, confusion, and something approaching awe. Captain Hughes had frozen mid-keystroke on his tablet, his mouth slightly open. "Captain Sarah Caldwell," Morrison repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "United States Air Force." Sarah nodded, her hands still trembling but her voice growing stronger. "Service number 2,847,392. Commissioned June 1971. Honorably discharged December 1979. Hughes's fingers flew across his tablet. "Sir, I'm searching military records now. If she's telling the truth, this should—" He stopped abruptly, his face going pale. "Oh my God!" "What?" Morrison demanded. Hughes turned his tablet around and Morrison leaned in to read. His eyes widened with each line, his professional composure cracking. "This can't be right." "It's right," Sarah said quietly, "every word of it." Morrison looked up at her, and for the first time she saw something other than suspicion in his eyes. "According to this, you were one of the first women to fly military aircraft in the Air Force. You flew reconnaissance missions during the Cold War. You have commendations from—" He stopped, reading more carefully. "Some of this is still classified. I don't even have clearance to see half of what's in your file." "That's why I never talk about it," Sarah said. "Some of those missions are still sensitive, even after all these years. I signed agreements that don't expire just because I got old." Hughes was frantically typing, cross-referencing, pulling up more data. "Sir, she's in the archived personnel records. Captain Sarah Caldwell, pilot qualification in multiple aircraft types including T-38s, reconnaissance variants of the F-4. He paused, scrolling. "Jesus, she logged over 2,000 military flight hours, multiple Air Force Commendation Medals, a Distinguished Flying Cross." "That was for a mission I still can't discuss," Sarah interrupted gently. Morrison stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Captain Hughes, we need to verify this immediately. Contact the Pentagon, use the number in that flag, and get Colonel Harrison in here now." "Colonel Harrison?" Sarah asked. "Base commander," Morrison explained, his demeanor toward her already shifting. "Mrs. Mitchell, Captain Caldwell, if what we're seeing is accurate, this changes everything. But you have to understand, we need to confirm." "I understand," Sarah said. "You're doing your job. I would have done the same thing." Hughes was already on his phone, speaking rapidly to someone at the Pentagon. Morrison remained standing, looking at Sarah with new eyes. The elderly woman sitting across from him was no longer just a civilian who'd violated restricted airspace. She was a veteran, a pioneer, someone who'd served her country when women weren't even supposed to dream of flying military aircraft. "May I ask," Morrison said carefully, "why you kept this secret? Why not tell us immediately when we brought you in?" Sarah smiled sadly. Because I've spent 45 years trying to be just Sarah Mitchell, not Captain Caldwell. After I left the service, I wanted a normal life. My husband knew, of course, but we agreed it was the past. I raised my daughter without her knowing her mother had flown reconnaissance missions over hostile territory. I baked pies and raised chickens and was just normal. She wiped her eyes. I never wanted the attention. I just wanted to fly for the love of it, without the weight of what I used to be. The door burst open, and a tall man in his 60s wearing a colonel's insignia strode in. Colonel James Harrison had commanded Malmstrom Air Force Base for 3 years, and in that time, he dealt with numerous security incidents. But the look on his face suggested this was different. "Where is she?" Harrison demanded. Then his eyes found Sarah and he stopped cold. Morrison gestured to Sarah. "Sir, this is Sarah Mitchell, the pilot we intercepted, but according to Pentagon records, she's actually—" "Captain Sarah Caldwell," Harrison finished, his voice barely above a whisper. He moved closer to the table, studying Sarah's face with intense scrutiny. Born 1956, commissioned through ROTC at Arizona State, one of the first 12 women to complete undergraduate pilot training. Flew reconnaissance missions from 1973 to 1979 in some of the most dangerous operations of the Cold War era. Sarah looked up at him. "You've done your homework, Colonel." "I didn't need to," Harrison said, pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily. "Captain Caldwell, you don't remember me, but I remember you. Edwards Air Force Base, 1977. I was a second lieutenant fresh out of pilot training. You gave a briefing to our class about operational security and mission planning." He shook his head in wonder. "You were a legend even then. Every pilot in that room knew who you were. The woman who'd proven she could fly just as well as any man, maybe better." Sarah's eyes widened. "I remember that briefing. You were all so young, so eager." "You told us something I've never forgotten," Harrison continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You said that flying wasn't about being male or female. It was about respect for the aircraft, respect for the mission, and respect for the sky. You said anyone who couldn't respect all three had no business in a cockpit." "I still believe that," Sarah said softly. Hughes hung up his phone. "Sir, Pentagon confirms everything. Her service record is authentic. They're pulling her complete file now, but it's going to take time. Most of it is still classified at various levels." Morrison sat back down, running his hand through his hair. "Captain Caldwell, Mrs. Mitchell, I don't even know what to say. We intercepted you like you were a threat, and all this time." "You were doing exactly what you should have done," Sarah interrupted firmly. "I violated restricted airspace. You responded appropriately. The fact that I used to wear the uniform doesn't change that." She paused. "Although I hope it means you'll believe me when I say it was an honest mistake." Harrison leaned forward, his eyes earnest. "Mrs. Mitchell, no one here doubts that anymore. But I need you to understand something. What you did, flying when women weren't supposed to fly, succeeding when everyone expected you to fail, proving that gender had nothing to do with ability, you changed the Air Force. You changed military aviation." "There were others," Sarah protested. "Not many," Harrison countered. "And you were one of the first, one of the best. Do you have any idea how many female pilots are flying today because you showed it was possible?" Sarah thought of Captain Torres in that F-22, and tears filled her eyes again. But this time, they weren't tears of fear. Morrison stood up. "Colonel, what are your orders?" Harrison looked at Sarah for a long moment. "Get her some coffee, something to eat, make her comfortable, and someone find Major Chen and Captain Torres. I think they need to know exactly who they intercepted today." As Morrison and Hughes left to follow orders, Harrison remained, studying the woman across from him, a legend he'd admired for decades, sitting in an interrogation room after being treated like a criminal. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "on behalf of the United States Air Force, I need to apologize." "Don't," Sarah interrupted gently. "You protected a critical facility. You did what needed to be done. I'm the one who should apologize for causing this incident." Harrison shook his head slowly. "Captain Caldwell, you have nothing to apologize for, nothing at all." The weight of the moment settled over them both, a moment where past and present collided, where a forgotten hero was suddenly remembered, where an elderly woman stopped being a suspect and became something far more important, a symbol of what courage and determination could achieve. Word traveled through Malmstrom Air Force Base like lightning through storm clouds. Within 15 minutes of Colonel Harrison's confirmation, every pilot, officer, and senior enlisted member knew the truth. The elderly woman they'd intercepted wasn't a confused civilian or potential threat. She was Captain Sarah Caldwell, a name that appeared in aviation history books, military leadership courses, and inspiration speeches about breaking barriers. In the fighter squadron ready room, Major David Chen stood frozen, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. "Say that again," he told the operations officer who just delivered the news. "The woman you intercepted, she's Captain Sarah Caldwell, one of the first female military pilots in Air Force history, Cold War reconnaissance missions, Distinguished Flying Cross, the whole 9 yards." Chen set down his mug carefully before he dropped it. "That sweet grandmother crying in her Cessna is a decorated combat pilot." "Was," the operations officer corrected. "Retired 1979, but yeah, that's her." Captain Jessica Torres appeared in the doorway, her face flushed from running. "David, tell me you've heard. Tell me I didn't just—" Her voice broke. "Oh God, we terrified her. We made her think we were going to shoot her down." Chen moved to her side. "Jess, we were following protocol. We didn't know." "That doesn't make it better." Tor's eyes filled with tears. "Do you understand who she is? Sarah Caldwell flew when the Air Force barely admitted women existed. She proved we could do this job. Every female pilot in the military owes her a debt, and I just scared her half to death with a fighter jet." Other pilots began gathering, having heard the news. A young captain named Peterson pulled up photos on his tablet. "Look at this. I found her in the Air Force Historical Archives." The screen showed a black and white photograph from 1974. A young woman in a flight suit stood before a reconnaissance aircraft, her chin raised defiantly, eyes sharp and determined. Even in the grainy photo, her confidence was unmistakable. She was surrounded by male pilots, the only woman in the group, and while they looked uncomfortable, she looked like she belonged. "That's really her," someone whispered. "Same person we just intercepted," Chen confirmed, comparing the photo to his memory of the terrified elderly woman. 45 years makes a difference, but look at the eyes. That's her." Peterson scrolled through more images, more flight lines, more missions, more moments captured in black and white. In some photos, Sarah stood alone. In others, she was briefing groups of men twice her size. In one particularly striking image, she was climbing into a cockpit while a crowd of skeptical male officers watched from below. "Here's her commendation record," Peterson continued, pulling up a document. "Air Force Commendation Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, Meritorious Service Medal, Distinguished Flying Cross. And look at this." He pointed to a redacted mission report. "Most of her operational history is still classified. We can't even read what she did." A female lieutenant colonel named Patricia Mendez entered the ready room, her expression serious. "Colonel Harrison wants all squadron pilots in the main briefing room in 10 minutes. Captain Torres, Major Chen, he specifically requested you two be there first. You're meeting her." Torres felt her stomach flip. "Meeting her now?" "Now," Mendez confirmed. "And Torres, pull yourself together. This is a chance to thank someone who made your career possible." 5 minutes later, Chen and Torres stood outside a conference room, both unusually nervous. These were pilots who flew supersonic fighters into combat situations without flinching, but the thought of facing the woman they'd intercepted made their hands sweat. Colonel Harrison opened the door. "Major Chen, Captain Torres, please come in." They entered to find Sarah sitting at a conference table with a cup of coffee, looking tired but composed. She'd cleaned her face, fixed her hair, and though her eyes were still red from crying, she held herself with quiet dignity. "Ma'am," Chen began, his voice formal. "I'm Major David Chen. This is Captain Jessica Torres. We were the pilots who intercepted you today." Sarah stood and both officers instinctively came to attention. She smiled gently. "Please don't do that. I'm not active duty anymore. I'm just Sarah." But neither pilot could relax. They'd read her service record. They'd seen the photos. They understood exactly who stood before them. Torres stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Captain Caldwell, I need to apologize. We frightened you terribly and Her voice broke. "You don't know what you mean to people like me. I'm a fighter pilot because you proved it was possible. When I was a little girl, I saw a documentary that mentioned your name, your service, and I knew that's what I wanted to be. And today I terrified my hero." Sarah's eyes filled with tears and she moved forward to embrace Torres. "Oh, sweetheart, no. You did your job, you did it perfectly. Don't you dare apologize for that." Torres clung to her, crying openly now. "I could have shot you down, we were authorized." "But you didn't," Sarah said firmly, pulling back to look Torres in the eye. "You identified the situation, assessed the threat level, and responded with professionalism. That's exactly what good pilots do." She smiled through her own tears. "And look at you, an F-22 pilot. When I was flying, women couldn't even get near fighters. Now you're flying the most advanced aircraft in the world. That's not because of me. That's because of you, your skill, your determination, your courage." Chen cleared his throat, visibly moved. "Ma'am, I've been flying for 15 years. I thought I knew Air Force history, but I never heard your name until today. Why is that?" Sarah returned to her seat, gesturing for them to sit as well. "Because I asked for it that way. When I left the service, I wanted to disappear into normal life. The Air Force was changing, women were being accepted more, and I didn't want to be held up as some kind of symbol. I just wanted to fly for the love of flying, raise my family, and live quietly." She paused. "Maybe that was selfish. Maybe I should have stayed visible, helped others coming after me. But I was tired of fighting. Tired of proving myself every single day. I just wanted peace." "You earned that peace," Torres said fiercely. "You shouldn't have had to fight at all." "But I did," Sarah said simply. "And so did the women who came after me, including you. That's how progress works. Each generation fights their battles so the next generation can fly a little higher." The door opened, and Colonel Harrison entered with a dozen more pilots, both male and female, all eager to meet the legend. Among them was Major Patricia Hayes, a C-17 transport pilot who carried a worn folder. "Captain Caldwell," Hayes said, opening the folder. "I found these in the base archives. I thought you might want to see them." Inside were mission reports from the 1970s, photographs of a younger Sarah with various flight crews, and news clippings from military publications. One article headline read, "Female pilot proves her worth in demanding reconnaissance role." Sarah touched the photos gently, memories flooding back. "I haven't seen these in decades. I didn't even know copies existed outside classified files." "You're part of Air Force history," Harrison said. "These belong in our heritage room with your permission. Future pilots need to know your story." Sarah looked around the room at the faces watching her, young and old, male and female, all of them pilots who lived the dream she'd helped create. Torres stood close by, wiping her eyes. Chen stood at attention despite her earlier request. They all looked at her with respect bordering on reverence. "On one condition," Sarah said finally. "Tell the whole story. Tell them about the failures too, the times I wasn't good enough, the mistakes I made. Don't make me into some perfect hero. I was just a pilot who loved to fly and refused to let anyone tell me I couldn't." Harrison smiled. "Deal." As the gathered pilots began asking questions, sharing their own stories, thanking her for paving their way, Sarah felt something shift inside her. For 45 years she'd hidden her past, convinced that her service was best forgotten. But looking at these faces, especially Tor's, whose career existed because Sarah had refused to quit, she understood that hiding hadn't been protection. It had been waste. Her story mattered, her struggles mattered, and maybe, just maybe, sharing them could still make a difference. 3 hours later, Sarah stood beside her Cessna on the tarmac, watching maintenance crews complete the final repairs. The base commander had insisted on replacing her malfunctioning transponder at no cost and had personally supervised a complete inspection of her aircraft. Everything was ready. It was time to go home. But nothing about this departure resembled her terrified landing. Colonel Harrison approached with a leather folder in his hands. "Captain Caldwell, before you leave, I wanted to present you with something." He opened the folder to reveal a certificate, an official commendation from Malmstrom Air Force Base, recognizing your service to our nation and apologizing for the circumstances of today's incident. Sarah took the certificate, her hands trembling slightly. "Colonel, you don't need to apologize. I violated." "You made a navigation error," Harrison interrupted gently. "Something that happens to pilots of all skill levels, but your grace, dignity, and understanding throughout this ordeal have reminded us all what true professionalism looks like." He extended his hand. "It's been an honor, ma'am, a true honor." Sarah shook his hand, then found herself pulled into a respectful embrace. Around them, dozens of Air Force personnel had gathered, maintenance crews, security forces, pilots, and administrative staff. They'd all heard the story. They all wanted to see the legend one more time before she left. Major Chen and Captain Torres approached, both in full flight suits. Chen carried something in his hands, a patch from the 186th Fighter Squadron, the unit that had intercepted her. "Ma'am, we'd like you to have this. Consider yourself an honorary member." Sarah accepted the patch, her eyes stinging with tears. "I'll treasure this." Torres stepped forward, her voice thick with emotion. "Captain Caldwell, I have a request. Before you leave, would you take a photo with us, with our F-22s in the background?" Sarah looked surprised. "You want a photo with me?" "Ma'am," Torres said, her voice breaking slightly, "I want my daughter to know that I met you. I want proof that this day happened. You're the reason I'm wearing this uniform. Please." How could Sarah refuse? They walked together to where the two F-22 Raptors sat on the tarmac, sleek and deadly in the afternoon sun. Maintenance crews quickly positioned the aircraft for the best angle. Sarah stood between Chen and Torres, the three of them framed by the advanced fighters. As the base photographer snapped pictures, Torres whispered, "Thank you, for everything you did, for every door you opened." Sarah squeezed her hand. "Thank you for walking through them, for being better than I ever was." "That's not true," Torres protested. "It is," Sarah said firmly. "You fly aircraft I could only dream of. You've achieved things I never could. That's how it should be. Each generation should fly higher than the last." More photos were taken. Sarah with the entire fighter squadron, Sarah with Colonel Harrison, Sarah standing alone before her humble Cessna with the mighty F-22s behind her. Each image captured a moment of history, a bridge between past and present. Finally, it was time. Sarah climbed into her Cessna, running through her pre-flight checks one last time. Everything was perfect. The new transponder glowed steadily on her panel, broadcasting her identification clearly. She started the engine, and the familiar rumble brought her comfort. This was who she was, not the medals or the commendations or the groundbreaking service. Just a pilot and her plane, ready to fly. Malmstrom Tower, November 723 Tango Charlie, ready for departure. November 723 Tango Charlie, you are cleared for takeoff, runway 14. Godspeed, Captain Caldwell. It's been an honor. Sarah smiled at the use of her old rank. "Thank you, Tower. The honor was mine." She taxied to the runway, lined up, and advanced the throttle. The Cessna rolled forward, gathering speed, and then she was airborne again, climbing into the Montana sky. Below, she could see the gathered personnel waving, a final salute to an unexpected visitor who'd reminded them all of their heritage. Then, impossibly, she heard Chen's voice on the radio. November 723 Tango Charlie, this is Raptor Flight. Request permission to escort you out of the area. Sarah's breath caught. Raptor Flight permission granted and thank you. Two shapes appeared in her mirrors, then moved smoothly alongside her. The same F-22s that had terrified her hours ago, now flying as her honor guard. Chen on her left, Torres on her right, both jets positioned perfectly, maintaining formation with her slow-moving Cessna. Captain Caldwell, Torres' voice came through, emotional but controlled. On behalf of every woman who's ever flown, thank you for showing us the way. Sarah couldn't speak. Tears streamed freely down her face as she flew between the two fighters, a symbolic passing of the torch from one generation to the next. For 15 glorious minutes, they flew together, past meeting present, struggle meeting triumph, one woman's lonely battle meeting its legacy of thousands who now flew without the barriers she'd faced. As they reached the edge of the restricted area, Chen radioed again. November 723 Tango Charlie, this is where we leave you. Fly safe, ma'am, and thank you for your service. Thank you for yours, Sarah replied, her voice barely steady. The two F-22s performed a graceful victory roll above her, then peeled away, climbing rapidly into the sky until they were just silver specks against the blue. Sarah watched them go, her heart full of emotions she couldn't name. She continued westward, her course corrected, her transponder working perfectly. 3 hours later, she landed in Seattle, where her daughter Bate and granddaughter Emma waited with worried expressions. "Mom, where have you been? We've been trying to call," Bate exclaimed as Sarah climbed out of the plane. "You won't believe the day I've had," Sarah said, hugging them both tightly. Emma pulled back, studying her grandmother's face. "Grandma, have you been crying? What happened?" Sarah looked at her 16-year-old granddaughter, this girl who dreamed of being an astronaut, who lived in a world where women could reach for any star they chose. And she made a decision. "Emma, honey, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you years ago." Sarah took her hand. "Your grandmother used to be a military pilot, one of the first women to fly for the Air Force, and today I got to see what that meant to the pilots flying now." Emma's eyes went wide. You were a pilot, like a real military pilot." "I was," Sarah confirmed, smiling through fresh tears. "And I have so many stories to tell you, if you want to hear them." Emma threw her arms around her grandmother. "Are you kidding? I want to hear everything." That evening in Bates' living room, Sarah opened up for the first time in 45 years. She told them about flight training, about missions she could finally discuss, about the discrimination and doubt she'd faced and overcome. She showed Emma the squadron patch Chen had given her and the photos on her phone from earlier that day, her standing with the F-22 pilots, the honor escort, the moment when her hidden past had collided with an extraordinary present. Emma listened with rapt attention, her eyes shining. "Grandma, you're amazing. You're like a superhero." "No, honey," Sarah corrected gently. "I was just a person who refused to accept limitations, just like you can be." Later, after Emma had gone to bed and Bate had thanked her mother tearfully for finally sharing her story, Sarah sat alone on the back porch, looking up at the stars. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Torres. "Made it home safe. Wanted you to know I called my daughter tonight and told her I met a real hero today. Attached is the photo. You should see the look on her face. Thank you for being our inspiration." The attached photo showed Torres' daughter, maybe 10 years old, staring at the image of Sarah between the two fighter pilots, her expression full of wonder. Sarah typed back, "Tell her to reach for the stars, and tell her that her mother is my hero too." She set down her phone and smiled into the darkness. For 45 years she'd hidden her light, convinced that her story was best left in the past. But today had taught her something profound. The battles she'd fought, the barriers she'd broken, the lonely paths she'd walked, they hadn't been just for her. They'd been for Tors, for Emma, for every girl who'd ever looked at the sky and dared to dream of flying. Sarah Mitchell returned to her quiet Montana ranch a week later, back to her chickens and her pies and her simple life. Her neighbors still didn't know about her past, but now, when she flew her Cessna over the mountains, she flew with her head held high, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed. She was Captain Sarah Caldwell, pioneer, hero, legend. And most importantly, she was finally at peace with both who she'd been and who she'd become. The sky, after all, belonged to everyone brave enough to claim it. The end.